Good morning, everybody. Almost afternoon. We're getting there. So thanks for joining us right before lunch. As Allison said, my name is Kitt Letcher, and I am the president and CEO for Better Business Bureau serving Central Oklahoma. And I have been in this role for the past 7 years. I just had my 7-year work anniversary this last week, which has been a really interesting milestone considering all the stuff that we're going through right now. But I can say that working at BBB and the team that I have is absolutely a huge point of pride in my life. And it's a really fantastic place to work because I have a fantastic team. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I am originally from Oklahoma. I'm originally from Tulsa. My husband and I moved to Oklahoma City in 2005 after he finished pilot training with the Oklahoma Air National Guard. So we went through Air Force pilot training. And with my husband's career, he is a 20-year career pilot with the military and with Delta. And so he is not often home, or he has a really kind of crazy work schedule. So that means that my life has to be extremely flexible, which for me works really well because that day in, day out, like routine regimen is really difficult for me. That is not my natural pace. And so having that flexibility and being able to create that in my work environment has been really exciting and a lot of fun. My first job out of college, I worked for the Tulsa Airport Authority. So I learned a lot about dealing with disasters because I was giving a tour to school children on September 11th when we had to shut everything down. So that was a weird and crazy introduction to the life of disaster work. I worked for Campfire USA, which is where I figured out I don't like working with children. And so when we talk about workplace culture, part of it is owning your strengths and the things that you're good at and you're not so good at. And I'm not good at working with kiddos. That is not one of my strengths. And Lord love people who can do it. And I have so much respect for them because that's not in my wheelhouse. And then from there, we went to pilot training and I learned how to do fundraising within the federal community. And I learned that I love giving tours. And one of my jobs that I had is I worked as a community relations kind of rep on base and gave tours to spouses as they were moving to Del Rio. We went to Mexico for the day and would go shopping and I would show them around the city and some historical things. So had a lot of different experiences before we moved to Oklahoma City in 2005. And then from there, I worked at United Way of Central Oklahoma for 8 years before I started at BBB. And at United Way, I had probably 3 or 4 different jobs in a variety of different roles and different departments. And I will say that was probably one of the absolute best learning grounds for leadership and working with a team and helping to build up a team and helping people realize their strengths and things that they can do well, but also the things that we don't do well. And so I really have a tremendous amount of respect for United Way and the work that we did there, and they're still doing in our community. So whenever I moved to Better Business Bureau, it was such a stark drastic difference compared to where I was. When I worked at United Way, we were close to 40 employees. We had a huge base of volunteers. We had a lot of different irons in the fire and things running. And when I came to BBB, we had 5 people on staff. And what was interesting about it is I knew nothing about BBB before I started there. I knew that the basic principles of what BBB did and why it was important and relevant, but I didn't really understand the depth of what BBB does for our community. And so when I started there and I started uncovering all these different things, it just opened up so many doors and opportunities in my mind as far as like what we could be and how we could be perceived in the community and the value that we could add to our community. But that doesn't happen without a team. That is not a one-person show. And so it was really exciting to see the opportunity to grow that team and create something really organically from the ground up. BBB had been in our community for 80 plus years whenever I started there. However, we had a long way to go in recovery of our perception and what people think that we do and what we are actually able to do. And for me, that started with the people that we hired and worked with at BBB. So, some of the fun things about just growing that team and growing that style of workplace culture is what we're going to talk about today. And I'm excited to explain and share with you the different things that we've done and how being intentional and then how not paying attention can be two very different things, but have really polar opposite effects on what happens within your culture, within your organization. So we're going to talk through that. And then one of the places that I really want to start, because being a CEO at BBB, this was the first time that I've ever done this in 2013. And I got a lot of advice whenever I started. And I'm sure you guys have probably experienced that where somebody said, oh, you're going to go into this role. Well, here's all the things you're supposed to do. And I hate that word, supposed to do. I hate it almost as much as I hate being told no, but that's a whole other conversation. I feel like people who have never been in a leadership position or been the head of an organization and their opinion of what you're supposed to do are myths. They are things that they've heard of, things that are supposed best practices, but unless you've actually executed those things, you don't know the consequences of those actions. And so some of the myths that I was told, things that I was supposed to do whenever I got to BBB, is that I had to be really hard. I had to be very definitive and like, these are the boundaries. This is the black and white. Like, you can't step over the line. You have to set hard rules for people. Otherwise, they'll walk all over you. And I was in my early 30s when I started at BBB. And so, it was easy to see how people would think in that scenario, somebody may take advantage of a more flexible work environment. But going to that extreme of having those hard rules and things did not align or match with my personality. They don't align with my core values as an individual. And so it just didn't work for me. And I've had people say, you have to wear a suit. You have to be extremely professional. You work for the Better Business Bureau. People expect you to show up like you work for a Fortune 500 company. And while they might expect that again, it's not going to happen. I feel very strongly in dressing for the occasion that you were going to match the other people in the room. And so a suit is not always appropriate, but there was that rigidity of you have to do this, otherwise people won't take you seriously. And that is not what I have found to be the case, because people respect when you walk the talk. Not necessarily if I show up in a suit, but I am full of hot air and I am not genuine and I'm not doing the things that I say that I'm going to do, it doesn't matter what I'm wearing, because you're never going to trust me anyway. So I was told that I had to do a good job of keeping my distance personally from the people that I work with. I should never hire friends. I should never hire family members. And so one of the first things I did was hire one of my best friends that I've known for over 15 years because it was somebody that I trusted and I knew had the same values that I did, that I could then build something with that would be part of my team, but would also be of somebody who would say, you're not doing this right. And I think we've veered off course. I don't think we're on track with where we should be. And would give me that honest feedback. And so somebody I could really trust. And so maybe working with friends doesn't always work. I will say I've been very judicious in how we've done that. But in my case, it has been a great tool, an asset to have somebody on my team that I knew in advance of working together. So and just other things that I was told, and we'll get into some of these more a little bit later, but it's just like, you have to know how to do every single job in your office. You have to be the last one to leave work. You can't leave work to pick up your kids, because then people will think you weren't prioritizing your job over your kids. Don't cry at work. It's like, well, sometimes those tears just come out and I don't know what to tell you. It's just part of life. And so when I was told all of these things, and over the years I've been told more, but when I look at it, and if I had taken all those things to heart, the intent isn't to create, a really harsh work environment. It's to create boundaries and expectations. But that is not how I wanted to create boundaries and expectations, because if I had listened to all of those rules, the type of workplace that we would have would be people would feel really closed off. I think we would have a very low level of trust. There would be really superficial expectations, and not getting to the core of the work we're doing for our community. People would feel micromanaged, and I think there would be a level of fear that is built within that framework, and that is not at all what I wanted to create. And so what's interesting is when I look on the flip side of that and thinking about the myths I have heard or been told, as from an employee perspective, the things as an employee that you should do. I had somebody say, you really can't talk back to your boss because your boss is always right. I'm like, well, I know firsthand that's not true, because I would never claim to always be right. That you always have to agree with your boss, that if someone on your team isn't pulling their weight, just pick up their slack and don't say anything about it. You don't have to do anything about it. Just they'll figure it out for themselves. And that creates a level of resentment, not trust. And again, don't cry at work. I don't know why that's been a big one, but the emotionality of our lives, for some reason, is not allowed at work. And I don't understand that, because we're all people. We are doing the best that we can. And so creating and fostering an environment where people can show up and be themselves and be their whole selves is the type of environment that I wanted to create. And I think that's what we have been really successful with at BBB. And so we're going to talk through our core values at BBB, and I'm going to tell you my top 5 lessons learned, things that at the root of every decision that we make and policies we put in place and interactions that we have with people, what are the different lessons that really drive that conversation and those relationships? So at BBB, our core values, and this is from my perspective and what I have worked to grow over the years, is to be genuine, show up as you are, and be the person at work that you are at home. I am not a political person. I'm not a manipulative person. I can't do that break where I'm like, okay, at work, I'm this way, and everybody understands that I'm this way. And then when I'm at home, I'm this way around my friends and family. Those two people are one and the same. And I think when we try to silo those personalities and nuances and things that make us unique and individual, that's when we are not giving our best selves at work. And we're certainly not giving our best selves at home, because we are constraining the things that really are our strengths and things that we should be bringing to the table and showing to everybody and helping learn from that and grow from that, but also so that other people can say, oh, you're not doing this well. You really need to work on this weakness, or your strength is so good. Will you teach me how to do that? Because if we're not showing our full selves, then what's the point? So be genuine and show up as you are. My next core value is be transparent. We are not perfect. I am certainly not perfect. I don't think that I have all the answers. And what I do have is the ability to learn from my mistakes. I am coachable. I am open to discussion, and I want to have good conversations about how we make things better. And part of that is vulnerability and being transparent in that vulnerability and just saying, I'm struggling right now, or I'm having a really great time right now. And those two things don't have to be, a discord within your organization or within your relationships. They should be something that you are always able to talk about. And by building trust, you can be more vulnerable, you can be more transparent. So that's a huge part of our organization. And then finally, being willing to learn. Coachable skills are not something that everybody has. They have either never gained them or never been in a situation where learning from their mistakes and being coachable is something that they can feel comfortable doing. And so when we hire and as we are training people, we're really looking for individuals who are coachable, because learning from our mistakes and learning how to do things better, improve processes, asking questions is what adds so much value to what we're doing at Better Business Bureau. So those are my top 3 core values: being genuine, being transparent, and being willing to learn. And so those really are drawn from the different lessons that I've learned in the areas that we have cultivated at BBB. And so my first lesson is hire with intention. And that sounds kind of trite, like it's, of course, hire with intention. Like you want to hire the best person for the job, right? But for me, hiring the best person for any job within our organization takes one very simple thing. They have to be a 50-50 fit. They have to be a 50 fit in culture and how we run our organization and the types of relationships that they build. And they have to be a 50% fit in competency. Can you do the job? And so if you are not equally balanced in those two things, it makes a huge difference. And I've seen this whenever I've hired people that are maybe like a 70% competency fit, like they just get it. They have such a high skill set. They've got really great education. They can do that job like with their eyes closed and do a really magnificent job. And that 30% culture fit doesn't jive. It creates so much just discourse and negative feelings around that individual and then what they bring to the workplace, that it is detrimental to the entire organization. And right now at BBB, you know, we have approximately 21 people on our staff. A few of those are part-time, so maybe 18 full-time employees in total. We're not huge by any means, and we have been growing over the last 7 years. And you can see where even at our size organization, the nuances of how those interactions happen, that one person can absolutely upset the entire apple cart. And it's been really interesting to watch that happen. And so I am, and my team is that helps me hire, we are very intentional about a 50-50 competency and culture fit and how that works. And so it's one of the reasons that we do group interviews. I might interview the person by myself and then bring in other people within the organization to interview them as well. You guys met Allison at the beginning of this. Allison went through like 4 rounds of interviews. And so she had to talk to me a couple times. She talked to her leadership a couple times. She talked to the people that she would be supervising, because we all have different perspectives on what that culture fit and competency fit look like. But those are all individuals that I trust, and they have made it through that process. And so I love that they are then part of the process to hire somebody and bring them on board and really have ownership of how that person will contribute to our team. So how we hire is very intentional. And I will tell you, one of the questions, and so my style is very discussional. I don't think that's a real word. I like having discussions. Let me put it that way. And so while, yes, we have a list of questions that we, for the most part, follow, maybe it's not verbatim, there was always one question that I ask every single time without fail, because I think it is one of the best insights into an individual's character and their coachability. And that question is, tell me about a time that you've made a mistake and what were the consequences or things that you learned from that mistake. And I've had some really good answers on this. And I'll get into this a little bit more later, just like how people answer. But the things that I'm looking for is, you know, can they own up to a mistake? Can they tell you a mistake that's truly theirs, that they made? Can they tell you truly like what the consequences of that were? Did they get fired? Did they get reprimanded? Did they get written up? Was it just, I lost a relationship? Whatever that may be, how much are they willing to share? Which is obviously scary in an interview, because maybe this is the first time that we're meeting, and that's a lot to share with a complete stranger, quite frankly. But I want to see and have some insight into their vulnerability and willingness to share, and how much ownership they're going to take of that mistake. And so sometimes I see people struggle with this, and they will say like, oh, I don't know if I can really think of something. And I'll say, okay, let me give you an example of a mistake that I made in my career and the consequences that happened from that. And I just share, when I worked at United Way, one of my first jobs I had a board of directors for a campaign that I ran. And the person in the role prior to me had been in that position for about 5 years and knew it really well, was really successful at it, and did a great job. And so she received a promotion, and so made that job available to me. And it was a job that I loved. And I had no idea what I was getting into, but it was so much fun to dig into it. And so I ended up having to present just a whole bunch of applications to our board of directors and explain my thought process and why these applications should be approved or denied. And I used her methodology of creating that process and doing the explanation. And the thing is, that process didn't fit me. It wasn't my style of communication. It wasn't true to how I think and process. And so, not to say that the process was perfectly fine. Like, she had done a great job with it. I just was not prepared for the level of explanation. And that was my fault completely, because I left it to the last minute, and I can go on and on. But what happened as a consequence of that is I had to go into my boss's office, who was in that meeting, of course, and apologize. And I was like, I am so sorry. I was not prepared. She's like, yeah, that was awful. It was really bad. And so I learned two things that day. One, I learned from my boss how to handle somebody else's mistakes with grace and give them the opportunity to fix it and move forward and understand what happens if you don't fix it and you don't do better. And then on the flip side, I learned I need to do a better job of taking something that works, and if it doesn't, like for somebody else, if it doesn't work for me the way it worked for them, tweak it and remold it so that it does in fact work for me and it does fit my strengths, so that I can be successful too. And that was not a dig on her form in any way, shape, or form, but it wasn't my style. And so owning that individuality, I think, is so very important in how we show up and be successful. And so I give that example when we're in interviews, if somebody needs some prompting, to show them kind of what I'm looking for. But then how they respond, now that they've had a little bit of time to think about it, they've had an example, tells me so much about their willingness to share. Because quite frankly, they're a complete stranger to me too. And the fact that I'm willing to share with them and be vulnerable, I think kind of lays the groundwork for my expectations and things that I'm looking for. So it's a really two-way street of what I think that conversation should look like. But that is the one question that I always ask, no matter what, in an interview. And it's I've gotten some really good examples and responses in that over the years, which has been fun. My next lesson, and I think this is the one that is the most important. This is the do or die, and that is, culture is built through relationships and connectedness. And I've seen it grow in just amazing ways when people feel truly connected and like they are part of a team, and that fiber between them, that framework works. And I've seen it just tear really good teams apart when your leadership is not intentional about being connected. So the way that we stay connected at Better Business Bureaus, we do events and activities together. We spend a ton of time together. And I know over the years that's been frustrating for people, because they're like, I have a ton of work to do. I cannot eat another freaking potluck or have another waffle. We eat a lot, BBB. But those communal times together where we're having lunch, we're doing a waffle day, we are taking a walk down to Devon Tower whenever it's open and getting gelato, those are our times to build relationships, because we're not talking about work. We're talking about things like that we did on the weekend. What are you looking forward to this weekend? What are your hobbies? Oh, I went over to an art exhibit at this place that's right down the street. Here's the things that I learned. We're having different meaningful conversations, and that connectedness builds relationships. And it doesn't have to cost money. We went one day, if you guys remember, in Oklahoma City, in front of the Performing Arts Center, they did this huge musical swings, which were super cool. I had no idea that they were there. I saw somebody on Instagram post about going over there with their kids. So I just walked through the hall and was like, I'm done for today. We're going to go swing. And they were like, what are we doing? I was like, yeah, just everybody grab your stuff. You don't need a purse or wallet or anything like that. It's not going to cost any money, but let's just go swing. And so we went over there. It was like 2 blocks from our office. And we spent 20 minutes swinging in front of the Performing Arts Center, literally on these huge, like, I don't even know how tall they were, swings. And when you swing back and forth, it plays musical notes. So then when you have all the swings going, it plays a song. And it was just so much fun and so easy. That's the thing. I think when people talk about connectedness and building relationship, it has to be hard. And like there has to be rules and policies around it. People have to understand the boundaries. And I think that's bupkis. I don't think you have to have rules and boundaries around things like that. I think building relationships is something as easy as when you get to work, setting your stuff down, grabbing a cup of coffee or grabbing a water or whatever your drink of choice is, and literally walking around the office and spending 2 to 5 minutes with each person. Hi, how was your day? How's your morning going? What'd you do this weekend? Did you see that show last night? Just tiny, tiny little things that seem insignificant, but slowly build a relationship so that that person has a parent who's been in the hospital, or somebody passed away that they're really close to that's not an immediate family member, or their kid's in a recital and they're super excited and so they need to leave early tomorrow to go see them in a recital. Like those things just add context to who we are as a whole individual. And it's something to me that has been extremely important, and it's a lesson that I learned from a boss that I had at United Way. If you guys are familiar with Bob Stevens, he's the president of United Way for a long time. And he was tremendous at this. It's probably one of the best things that I learned from him, because he would just take time and walk down the hall and just talk to people. If there was no rhyme or reason, there was no purpose behind it. It truly was the intent of getting to know you better and having a conversation and just checking in to see how you are and what's going on in life. Which also means when I see him now at events and functions and things like that, he has great recall of like, hey, how's Stuart doing with flying? Or how are your kids doing? And he knows my children's names and pets that we've had and different things like that. And it just creates that bond that I appreciate and have so much deep respect for. So that level of connectedness, that is one of those things that truly has to reflect your style of leadership and who you are. And I say that because, we've tried different things over the years. We have done outings. We've done like the wine and palette classes where you can go paint. And that wasn't a huge success. We had some people in our office that loved it, but it didn't necessarily fit because we don't do a lot of after hours events because most of our team members have families. And so that we prioritize that family time. We've done weekend outings. We went to River Sports one day and did the great big tower that they have, and we went zip lining. And that was so much fun. And what was nice about that particular event is not everybody had to participate. Some people are afraid of heights. They didn't want to do the zip lining portion, but they wanted to go. They wanted to participate and be part of the group. And so I think you have to be flexible in those events and what people can participate in and how they're able to show up. Because again, that goes back to being genuine and showing up as you are and what you can bring to the table. So it's why we do a variety of events. We've done things like we rented the Spokey's bicycles downtown, and that was a trip because you can only rent so many on one credit card at a time, FYI. But we rented Spokey's bicycles and we went over down into Bricktown and got ice cream. It wasn't a huge outing. It cost a little bit of money, but it was so much fun. It's something really different that none of us had ever done before. So it was just, there's a lot of different ways. And this is where, when we were smaller, it was easier for me to think of outings and things that we could do. And now that our staff has grown quite a bit, and we've got a lot of different personalities and things in there, it's fun because we've formed what we call a fun committee. And that committee is made up of at least one person from each department, but they are responsible for coming up with the outings and things that we do for the year. And so one of the things they came up with this last year, in January, we went snow tubing. We took like 2 hours out of the day. We went over to the Bricktown ballpark. And we drove over there because it's kind of a little ways from the office. And we just went snow tubing for the afternoon. We went back to work, finished up our work day, and had a fantastic time. It wasn't a huge expense. It wasn't a huge experience. It doesn't always have to be really lavish. It's just those small things that make a huge difference in your lives and in building your relationships. And so that's why I say, I think building those relationships, creating that connectedness is absolutely the core strength of our BBB, but I think it is the most important lesson that I've learned over the years about how to build a good workplace culture. The next lesson is live and grow in your strengths and individuality, and make sure that your team has that same latitude. So something that I have discovered about myself this last year, and I think George is still on the call, so he's going to love this. I'm not a detail person. And disclaimer, I've done that for a really long time. Anybody who knows me knows I am not a detail person at all. But I love like digging in with people and trying to be a part of like problem solving and growing processes. And so I would say over the last maybe 4 to 6 months, I've had to just own my strengths, which is strategic planning, and my weaknesses, which is not details, but it's also not procedure planning. I am awful at it. I make these really fantastic to-do lists and then don't do them because that is just, it is not my core strength. And so I have the latitude to grow that as I can because there's still some work to do there, but understand that that's not my strengths. It's probably not something that I should be doing, and I need to delegate it out to people who are really awesome at it. And so that's one of those things that we've worked really hard at BBB to help people grow in their strengths, but also understand the things that they're not really fantastic at, and how do you either like fix it, or how do we move it onto somebody else's plate who's really good at that? And that can be a really difficult thing to do. And there's a lot more leadership lessons in that is going to take up too much time for today. But what I will say is giving people grace to demonstrate their strengths and to really own the things that they're not amazing at. And then how do we problem solve that together does so much for culture, because we're not all amazing at everything. And I've listened to different podcasters and leadership lesson experts and things like that over the years. And while, yeah, I can grow that weakness and I'll probably make it like this much better, if I work on my strengths, I'm going to make them this much better. And I would much rather like dig into that and really excel and succeed. And I want that for my team. I don't want to beat people over the head with the things they're doing wrong. I want them to feel success. I want them to feel strength in the things that they do well, and they can achieve their goals and their milestones and the things that make us better as an organization, because that's truly where we are better. So it's just leading with that positive intent, in my opinion, versus looking at the things like, okay, you just keep doing this wrong, instead of saying, okay, this isn't working. How do we fix it? What's the next thing? What's the tweak that we need to make? And owning that style. So I think that makes a huge difference with any workplace culture. Okay, lesson number 4, listen to people's ideas, but evaluate the intent of that idea against your culture. Does that idea match with how you intend to do business, treat people, reach your goals, all of those different things? And this is kind of a more complex lesson, and I will give you an example of how I did this poorly. Early at BBB, I had a person who was in a finance position and did an amazing job, was really, really good at their job. But that person was looking to grow and just have more authority and ownership power, whatever you want to call it, within our organization. And we were a really small organization at the time. We probably had 10 people. And so came to me one day and he goes, okay, I've been looking at an org chart, and one of the things that I think we really need to fix and do better is the hierarchy of our organization. I was like, okay, what does that mean? Tell me more about what your thoughts are like, what needs to be fixed. And he goes, well, you have a really like lateral org chart. There's nobody really has to report up. Like it just comes to you or it comes to this other person. And I just feel like people would understand their roles and responsibilities better if we created a couple more layers, so that they had a supervisor to report up to, because it's just too many people reporting to you. And it was like, okay. It's like, maybe there's some validity in that. I'm not really sure, but I tell you what, I'll take it back. I'll think about it. I'll see what I can come up with. And so I did. I took it very seriously. I started delving into, how do we break out different departments? What does that look like? Who could be a good supervisor? And I really spent quite a bit of time on this process. And I was talking to my husband about it, and I was like, I can't make all these pieces work and what this person has suggested. And I think it's a good idea, but I'm not really sure why it's just not sitting well. And he's like, because it's not your style. What are you doing? I was like, oh, thank you. I needed that other person to help me own the way I lead. And what it comes down to is the person who had this idea wanted to be a supervisor, wanted to grow that department, wanted more people that he had the authority over. He wanted more power within our organization. And quite frankly, it was never going to happen. Not because he wouldn't have been a good manager at some point, but because we just didn't have the room for it. It's not how our culture worked. It's not how our organization worked. And it was creating so many more systems and processes and things that created intricacies and complications that were absolutely unnecessary. And so now when people have suggestions, my first thought is, how does this compare to our goals and our core values? Align with what our intention is for how we're doing businesses, how we're serving customers, how we're serving our employees. Does this match and align with all of those things? And if it doesn't, we will need to rework that suggestion or scrap it because it just does not fit. And that's not to say that we haven't changed policies and procedures and our org chart and all those different things over the years, but it has to be in a way that honors the values of our organization and the people within it. Because at the very heart of what we do, my team is my most important priority. And there's no way around that. That is, we have businesses that are accredited, and I'm so happy that we do, and that is our service. But my priority is my team, because if they are not happy and they're not thriving and I'm not helping them succeed, then there's no reason that we should even show up to work, because we're not going to be successful as an organization. And so looking at the suggestions, goals, values, things like that, like it has to resonate with how we are successful as an organization. And our organization is successful when our team is successful. And I know that is the driving force behind all of our decisions. So the intent of ideas is vastly important. And the last lesson that I will leave you guys with is giving grace and boundaries together. One of my biggest frustrations, and it's frustrations with society as a whole, not within like any specific area, but one of my biggest frustrations is whenever we've hired somebody and they're fairly new to our team and something comes up and they have a family emergency, they have to go out of town, they need a little bit of time off work. It could just be really minor. Hey, I have a doctor's appointment. What happens if I leave early? Like, then you make up the time later. It's like, okay, but how many of those do I get before you fire me? It was like, whoa, who said anything about firing you? That's not something we have discussed at all. The things that I have seen and questions I have been asked, or different supervisors on our team have been asked for people's life situations, it blows my mind with the lack of grace that people are given within other organizations and their fears that they bring to BBB whenever they join our team. Because it's, you get one warning and then you're out the door. You can't be late. If you don't clock in on time, this isn't going to work. And it's not just like, I was stuck in traffic, I'm late. Like things like that happen, obviously, and if they become a habitual problem, there's a whole different conversation that goes with it. But I think at the front end of this is people need grace. They need space to understand what the boundaries are, but also, life happens. And my job is to create a work environment where people are successful. And if you are so afraid of keeping your job because we have set these crazy boundaries in place that they don't match with how you operate, then we're not doing a good job of setting up this workplace. And I say that, this is also one of the hardest ways to manage, because while I want to give as much grace as possible, there are always going to be people who will take advantage. And so giving too much grace, too much leniency, if you are part of a team where you're experiencing that, it can breed resentment, unfortunately. And if you don't give enough, it can breed fear. So you have to be really careful with that balance. And so that's why I say give grace and boundaries together. And I'll give you an example. When one of the previous jobs that I've had, I was part of a team, and there was maybe, I don't know, 8 of us. And we had one person on our team who would consistently not pull their weight. They weren't doing the things that they needed to do. So the rest of us were always having to figure out what they hadn't done, because it fell on the rest of us. It was a reflection of our effort and our productivity as a whole. We weren't autonomous in our jobs. We were a team, truly. Like everything, all of our pieces together is what moved us forward. And this person didn't ever pull their weight. And so I talked to my boss about it. I talked to the employee about it. I was like, I'm so frustrated that we're still picking up your work. And she was like, well, I had this happen. I was like, right, but that's been going on for the last year. So we're like way beyond expectations here. And I talked to my boss about it, and he said, you know what? I am just uncomfortable with letting people go. And those people will always work themselves out. I was like, okay. And instead of being happy that I had a boss who was uncomfortable letting people go, it built a resentment in me that there was no consequences for the person who wasn't truly a part of the team. Because without them there, we could have gotten all the work done. We could have saved a ton of money. We probably all could have gotten raises and been able to do a lot of other things because we had a really good group and they weren't part of it. And so what I've tried to do in my position at BBB, whenever we have people who aren't pulling their weight, is, and this is where that relationship part is so important. Family emergencies happen, life happens, all of those things. And so I've had people on our team who, for whatever reason, has not been able to pull their weight. And it's okay, here's the grace I'm going to give and understand the boundaries that go with it. So I'm giving you a week off to handle this. I'm giving you 2 weeks off to handle this. We're going to add in, extra flexibility to your workplace. Do you need to work remotely so that you can handle this situation, whatever that is? And so we work through that together, because I think it's a very individual kind of system, but then helping them understand, okay, so when this is done, this is my expectation and what I need from you for us to be successful in moving forward. And that person is going to meet those expectations, or they're not. But if they don't even know where that line is and when they might potentially cross that boundary, it sets them up for failure. And that's not my intent in any of this. It is to allow people to deal with their situations and their lives in a way that they can, but also understanding at some point where it has to happen. And, for some people, maybe that's a leave of absence. And so you come back to us in a couple of months after you're allowed to take that time, and then we do something else. And so that's why it has to be really individual. And you have to be able to have those upfront hard conversations with people and ask what's going on. Why are you showing up in this way? This seems really different from how you have been acting versus where, our expectations are. So what does that look like for you? And just getting to understand the context of the situation that they're dealing with. And so that's why I frame that as give grace, but boundaries together. So all of those things are compiled together. So that's a lot of information in the last 47 minutes. So my 5 lessons are: hire with intention, culture is built through relationships and connectedness, live and grow in your strengths and individuality, and make sure that your team has the same latitude, listen to people's ideas, but evaluate the intent of that idea against your culture, and give grace and boundaries. So those are all the things that I think make our culture at Better Business Bureau successful, things that I'm very proud of, and things that we are constantly working on growing and doing better because they change. So I can see Allison popped up on my screen. And I will open it up. If you guys haven't already put questions in the chat, I would love to take those. And just if you have questions, comments, things that you want to know more about or converse about, I'm totally game.
Kitt, I'm so glad you said that. Thank you so much for all the information. Yes, please take a drink and a breath for a moment. And folks, please type in the chat. You're welcome, as we said at the beginning, to send it to everyone, or you're welcome to send it to myself, A. Abbott, or Allison Abbott, as it were, directly. So while you guys are thinking about what you may want to ask or add, and thanks, folks, I see some people chiming in. I want to give you guys kind of a quick peek behind the curtain, because it's really easy to hear people talk about the things Kitt just shared and say, do they really live into that? Is that real? And I will share with you that it absolutely is. And one of my best, more recent examples of that, truly a peek behind the curtain, because Kitt and I were 2 of 4 people in the room when we had this quick conversation. But at the very beginning of COVID, when we all had to start making hard decisions without a lot of data and information readily available to us, right? Kitt pulled myself and my fellow leadership team members in a room and said, okay, we're throwing the whole rule book basically out the window, because we all had to roughly 12 weeks ago, right? But she said our 2 core goals in this season are going to be retaining staff, if we can, and we have, and helping our accredited businesses and our business community and our service area across the state of Oklahoma get through this time. So how are we going to do those 2 things? And that set the pace for the entire conversation. But more largely, what I personally love about Kitt's work style, and you can hopefully get a sense of the things that Kitt previously shared, that she really doesn't live by all the other rules and perceptions about leadership, which for me is so beautiful because I don't either. And so the fact that we were able to then collectively as a leadership team come up with some of those things, and then Kitt presented them transparently to the staff about, here are our goals in the season, and here's what we're going to do to protect you and people that do or don't come into our building and those types of things. But the way in which that was communicated, again, in a transparent way, is something that Kitt, you beautifully lead us through, and that being one example. And so if you all aren't doing that in some manner already, I really encourage you to learn from Kitt's knowledge and experience in this whole culture conversation of, that is an old school leadership team should not be communicating certain things down to the staff, and that is not a practice that we do share. Yeah. Of course, share appropriately, but we do share, and so that's something that I wanted to make certain that was included today.
Yeah, and adding on to that, thank you, Allison. I appreciate that. I try very hard to walk the talk. Yeah, that's how you say it. And so I share when things are happening in my life that are really hard too. So my husband deployed for the 13th time this last November and December, and I was like, I'm going to need grace from you guys. I am not going to show up as my most awesome self. It's going to be hard. And here's the things that I know I'm going to go through, because I've done this 13 times now. And so I'm going to need you to pull some of my weight. And I think that was a really hard thing for me to say. And I've had other people that are like, you never should have done that, because you can't show weakness, which that's baloney. But I think it reinforces the fact that we are all human. We're not perfect. We're doing the best that we can. And some days I'm doing like 120% and a rock star, and other days I'm at like 75% and barely pulling myself out of bed, because that's life. We all have those experiences. It's not perfect sunshine and roses every single day. So I love having that grace. And I will say that, one of the things And here's another shout out for George, because I have an awesome peer group that I'm a part of. But one of the things that we talk about is the platinum rule, and that is treating other people the way they want to be treated. You know, the golden rule is treat people the way you want to be treated, but the platinum rule is treat people the way they want to be treated. And so when I put myself in the shoes of being an employee, if somebody else was making the rules for me, what would I want? And that is how I ingest that platinum rule, because we all have different circumstances. And so I need a really high level of flexibility and just autonomy and independence, but also I need that team. For me, that's a huge part of my success and strength, is working with those people. So that's what we have intentionally worked to build. So I'm going to go to the questions really quick. I've got the chat pulled up. And so Doug asked, if you were starting all over next week at BBB, what's one thing you would change about how you started? Oh my gosh. And that's such a hard question, because knowing now all the things, you know, I don't know that I would actually change a whole lot. When I started at BBB, two of the biggest changes that I made was I took the person who was working as our bookkeeper, who didn't actually have like financial experience, that's not her area of training, and moved her over into operations, because that is an area where she is awesome. And she's our senior vice president, and she is just amazing rock star at operations and procedures and putting things in place and helping her team grow. And so that was a decision that I made that worked out really well. And then hiring our vice president of business development. You know, people told me not to hire a friend. That's who I hired. And it has paid dividends, because it goes back to that hiring for skill set and hiring for cultural fit. And that was huge in that, because he had both of those things just in spades. So I'm glad that those were two of my very first decisions, because it really helped us lay the framework for where we are today. I would say the things I wish I had done differently along the way has more to do with, you know, letting people go a little bit faster. For my own sanity, I've kept people on probably longer than I should, because I really tried to work through every scenario of how to make them successful. And when I want them to be more successful in their job than they do, it's a good sign that they probably are no longer a good fit. And so those are the areas where I probably would make different changes along the way, and seeing when people are just struggling, and not because they're not trying, just because we are not a good fit for them. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but helping them, you know, gracefully exit to a role where they are going to be really successful. So that's how I'd answer that question. Hey, Kathy. Okay, so Kathy has a question. If you hire a close friend, what happens if you need to fire them? How do you handle that? And how do you keep other employees from feeling that you are giving them preferential treatment? And I will say, just full transparency, people probably do feel like I give Ryan special treatment because we are friends and we do joke around with each other. But I will also say that there are very clear expectations for how he is successful in his role. And so just like everybody else, he goes through a performance evaluation, but also being part of our leadership team, he is accountable not just to me, but to the other peers on that team. And I think that really helps because those relationships become almost more important than our personal relationship. So I think giving a couple of different layers of accountability is really important, having clearly defined goals, expectations for that person, and nipping it early if you do have any issues, whether it's, you know, attendance, productivity, whatever that looks like. And if you're going to hire a friend, it needs to be somebody that you can have a hard conversation with. And you need to know that going into that business relationship and so that you can say, you know, here's the things that I need you to be able to do and my expectations and what is going to make us successful. But when we need to have a hard conversation, here's what that's going to look like. And laying out the whole thing and being transparent. Because I'll say the nice thing about Ryan is whenever I'm not doing a great job, he'll pull me aside and say, okay, you could have handled that better. And he's a great coach for me too. And so having that level of trust, I think, is integral to that relationship and just being together. Okay. Oh, good. Kyle Golding. How much does culture fit go into deciding on third-party vendors and collaboration partners? That is a really, really great question. And here's why. Because I have hired wrong. Because I didn't do this where that person's culture fit for how they ran the organization didn't fit ours. Maybe it was too strict. Maybe they didn't have the different things that we needed, but their services were really good. So we weren't a really long-term kind of collaborative partner. So I would say now I do a much better job of intentional interviewing of our vendors and vetting them with the people that they are currently working with and asking how they work together. And I've actually learned some of this from, I've had vendors that have sent me referral sheets from other businesses. So like, let's say our IT company is working on getting another job. That job has sent me referral sheets so that I answer a whole list of questions for how we end up working with our current IT company. So they have a really good insight into what that operation looks like. And that's been really helpful, honestly, informing our own questions, because it was things that I had never thought of. And it was, you know, if you have like an unexpected emergency, what's your expectation for them coming into the building? How do they interact with your staff? What's their response time? Things like that, that you don't think necessarily are going to make a huge difference. But if you have an emergency, or if you have policies and procedures where they're not allowed in your building unless so-and-so escorts them to a specific space, then that makes a huge difference in how the rest of your operation is able to work around that. So a lot of different things, but instead of just taking like the bids and then lowest or middle price point, really asking more about what goes into that relationship, what goes into those services, how does that look like from their perspective, what do they expect from me as a business owner, and from my staff, like how are we going to interact together? So if I can't meet their expectations, then obviously that's not going to be a good fit either. So thank you all so much for the questions. I hope I was able to answer those as you needed. If you have any other follow-up questions, I'm happy to stay on for a little bit, but I just want to say thank you so much for your time today and spending your pre-lunch hour with us. And getting to know more about Better Business Bureau, what we do, but how we have made culture work at our organization and the ways that we are able to thrive. Let's see. And Allison, I don't know if there's a way to pop it up, but I will say if you guys don't follow us on social media already, we would love for you to give us some follows at BBB Central OK is on Instagram and Twitter. And I think on Facebook, it's Better Business Bureau of Central Oklahoma, all spelled out. Yeah, thank you, Allison. This is why teams are important. You guys have an awesome afternoon. I appreciate you being on here so much. And if we can ever be of service to you and your organization, please let us know.